Welcome to Interviews of Grief, the show where we explore the depths of human emotion. I'm your host, Megan Pruitt. Grief is a universal experience that often hides in the shadows of our lives, rarely discussed openly. But it's through these heartfelt conversations that we find healing and hope. This is where we bring to light the story of those who have faced loss and the myriad of emotions that come with it. We're here to discuss the good, the bad, and the sometimes ugly aspects of grief as we seek to honor the memories of those we've lost and extend a helping hand to others navigating the same path. So join us as we embark on this profound journey, turning sorrow into strength, one conversation at a time. Hello and welcome to Interviews of Grief. I'm your host, Megan Pruitt. I wanted to come on and just really thank everybody so much. We've only done 2 episodes so far. This will be the 3rd. And the response has just been something that I could have only hoped for, but not really dreamed for. So many of you have reached out. I'm blown away at the total number of listens and comments and shares. And I'm just honored that people will allow me to tell their story, to be the vehicle to tell their story. It means so much. And I just wanted to really just say a sincere thank you so much. In looking at some of the analytics, I realized that so many of you are not like in my personal connection, maybe a friend of a friend. Total strangers have found this, which is so cool. And so I wanted to come on and just do a quick about me, how I ended up doing this, what my story is, and just give you some background information so that you can understand, number one, why I'm doing this and where I'm coming from. Because I mentioned a lot of my personal experiences in the last 2 episodes, but I realized only a small handful of people really know the whole story. So I definitely wanted to come on and do that. And just get to know all of you a little bit better. I also want to note real quick, if any of you are interested in telling your story, reach out to me in a message on Facebook, or you can send an email to interviewsofgrief@gmail.com. A few people have reached out, and I'm so excited. The next stories that I get to tell, the next few interviews that I have lined up are profound, far-reaching, and I think can help a lot of people. So I'm really excited. But we'll go ahead and I'll tell you everything that you need to know about me. My name is Megan. I'm originally from Chicago, a suburb outside of Chicago. And we had moved around a bunch for my husband's career in baseball and finally settled on Aiken, South Carolina about, I think, 8 years ago. It's gone fast. And I absolutely love it here. And this is where myself and my family calls home. 2 years ago, in a few more days, we would have lost my mom to COVID, and it would have absolutely kind of rocked my world, my belief systems. It was an extreme and profound loss. So I'll start kind of just with that part of the story and then get into how Interviews of Grief came about. So my mom had just bought a second home here in Aiken and was going to be spending those cold Chicago winters here so she could get a break, be closer to the grandkids, and she was renovating the home. And she had been here, was here for my son's birthday, and got on a plane. And this also, to give context, was near let's call it the tail end of the pandemic. This is when masks were no longer mandated. Things were going back to being seemingly normal. The Delta variant was still around, but kids were back in school. It wasn't like this was kind of the height or, the peak of the pandemic. We were coming out the other side of it, if you want to say that. And she had mentioned to me, she said, Meg, somebody was sitting next to me on the plane and they were so sick, they kept pulling down their mask to blow their nose. And it was notable enough for her to tell me before she even got sick, which is ironic now. And so she would have settled back into life in Chicago for maybe 4 or 5 days, and then symptoms started showing. And what I think is really important to note is that when COVID slides into that severe category, it hits fast and it hits without mercy. And the damaging effects to your lungs are so quick, it's hard to even quantify. And so she had a fever, had upper respiratory like symptoms, went to get tested at like an urgent care. She wasn't admitted to a hospital or anything like that at first and came up positive with COVID. And I think they gave her steroids, kind of did the whole protocol. I believe at that point, they also prescribed her an antiviral pill. And ironically, about a week after my mom passed, the antiviral became FDA approved. And she was denied that antiviral, unfortunately, by the pharmacy because it was one day outside of the window, the recommended window to begin the course of medication. And I would be lying if I didn't wonder. We know that those are now very successful in reducing severe COVID. I do wonder what my story would be like to tell you if she had gotten her hands on those antiviral pills. But I have very much come to a place in my grief where it wasn't her story. That wasn't how it was supposed to go. And it's hard to arrive there, but it's very necessary. I believe it was not God's plan, as unfortunate as might have been. And I don't know if it would have saved her, to be honest. So there's no kind of point to dwell on it. But of course, I've thought about it. So she was denied that, gets home, takes kind of the, steroids. The steroids aren't letting her sleep. So she's not getting any sleep at night. And then she goes back again. I had a pulse ox machine delivered to her house, Target delivery order, and she was never one to like swear, and I didn't discover it until later. But she's taking her pulse ox, and I can hear her breathing, and she's down in the like high 80s, which you want to be 95 and above. That's kind of where you want to be. And she takes some breaths, and it just keeps going down and down and down. And then I hear her say, "Oh shit." And I didn't discover that until later, but it has given me a reference point for her to know that she was in trouble and that this wasn't good. So she goes back in again. My uncle drives her this time. She goes back in again, and they send her home with oxygen. And so, it happens so quickly. So she calls me the night before she enters the hospital and then the ICU, and she says, I say, like, "Mom, is it time to go back to the hospital?" She wasn't really making any sense, and just a daughter's intuition. I knew that something was not right, and I could just tell. And we would find out later that her oxygen was going into dangerous territory. But she said, "Happy anniversary." And I can remember kind of being like, "Wait, what?" And I held up my phone and, I'm looking at the date and I said, like, "Mom, you've got the right day, but you're a month early." And she says, "No, I want to make sure you know, happy anniversary. You were the most beautiful couple." And I said, "Well, thank you." And she would die on our wedding anniversary 30 days later. It's just wild. There's been so many crazy moments like that have so profoundly affected the journey that it's just beyond comprehension, really. And so she would have expressed to her boyfriend at the time, she would have said to him, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And I can tell you in my core, after that phone call and after she wished me a happy anniversary and I could tell something wasn't right, I called some family members and I told my husband, I said, like, "Listen, I'm not trying to be negative, but I don't know if she's going to make it." And I just had this feeling, this intuition, and I'm very glad. I think it was a gift, because I operated the entire journey with the mindset of a realistic expectation that she may not make it. And it allowed me to operate differently than other members of my family and to really have some last beautiful moments with her that I will treasure forever. And so Her boyfriend would have gone that next morning. She wouldn't have gotten any sleep again. He would have cooked her some chicken soup. She would have had her last meal at home. And he would have come back from the bank from depositing a check. And she would have been sitting on the sofa and her lips were turning blue, which is essentially she's hypoxic. And her oxygen in the report was at a 45, which you are beyond in trouble. This is going down the road of brain damage. I think if she had been left alone for another 30 so minutes, she would have passed away on her sofa. I have no doubt about it. So she goes this time to urgent care again because it was closer to her house. And then she was immediately admitted into the ICU. And that's where I mean, everything happened so fast. You have to think her lungs had gone, from working to no longer functioning to sustain life within under a week. Under a week. So she gets into the ICU and she's in the fight for her life. She switches between full faced oxygen to a nose cannula with a rebreather, back to the full face oxygen. And it was just this absolute roller coaster. And the only way that I can kind of quantify it or give you an analogy is that I felt like we were on a roller coaster with an, iron welded seatbelt that we didn't choose to get on. Nobody would ever choose this. And yeah, we were going upside down all around. And it was just, it's so crazy because these people who have died of COVID are in the absolute fight of their life in total isolation. And so the nursing staff talked to us a lot and would constantly mention that she was in good spirits. And I always kind of was so proud of her for that because he described to me that, a few of these patients would kind of start to lose it. And I don't know if I would have the mental fortitude to hold up like she did. You have to think you're fighting so hard. You're hearing this constant of your oxygen being forced down into your lungs. You can't even eat or drink. If that mask is taken off to put some chapstick on, you'll destat. If you are rolling over, you'll destat. And so you're in this, fight for your life. Everyone comes in full PPE with, their entire uh, face covered except for their eyes, and no one can visit you. I had talked to a few people who lost their significant other or parent or brother to COVID, and it's been a really mixed bag in terms of communication. Some people said that, like, an iPad was allowed to be placed into their room, and they were, able to just kind of sit there with their loved one on FaceTime. Other people got to come up to windows. Um, and we didn't really get any FaceTimes or anything like that with my mom. Uh, so the resounding message from day one till her last few days was that she had critical severe COVID and that the prognosis was not looking good. That they would be looking for the overall higher trends of showing progress. You cannot, when you're in the ICU with COVID, you cannot look at the minutia of every day. The metrics are going to mess with you. So I'll give you a tangible example for this. There is the PEEP, which is the pressure in which air is forced into your lungs by the machine. And you want the PEEP to continue and downtrend lower and lower because then that means that your lungs have the ability to take in the oxygen. I'm sorry if you're a nurse and I'm butchering this, is how I understood it. And so, you want PEEP to keep going down, and then you want the oxygen levels to go down. But when you slide into the territory of severe COVID, your lung capacity, you can think of it like concrete filling up in the lungs. And eventually, your lungs will have the function of a newborn baby. You'll be taking as many breaths as a newborn baby, which is traumatic to think about. And your lungs will no longer even require as much oxygen as they once had. And if you have the wrong shift in mindset, then you think these are progress. But if you're looking at the 500-foot view, they are not progress. They are indicative that somebody is trending worse and worse in the path. So, she's in there, she's fighting so hard. And I got a few texts out and back from her, but maybe three or four. And then she has a great day and she rallies and she's able to get on only the nose cannula oxygen. She's able to sit up and watch some HGTV and have a meal. And this was something that we found out was kind of common, like this last rally, the last kind of good day. And I'm so happy that she had it. And then I'm even more thankful that it was a nurse who has made an impression on my heart for the rest of my life. She was so kind. She was so sweet, so thorough. She just, you felt like you've known her. And I would find out that she had told that nurse too, "I don't think I'm gonna make it," and she would have told her all about her family. My mom would have said, showed her all about her family, and my mom would have felt strong enough probably because she could just breathe and talk at the same time, which would have been a feat, to get a phone call out. And so I'm standing in the aisles of TJ Maxx, I'll never forget it, and standing with strangers, and I see mom pop up on my caller ID for the last time in my life. And I knew that this was going to be a meaningful and very impactful last conversation. And so I answer it, and my mom says, "Meg, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry." And I said, "Mom, it's okay." Never have I heard my mom apologize for anything. Not that she had much to apologize for, but never, never had heard this. I said, "Mom, it's okay." And she said, "I make stupid decisions and I'm done being stupid." And it was like this moment. I don't know if any of you are fans of This Is Us, but Randall's in there and his dad is dying and he grabs his face and he says, "Just breathe." And I very much knew that my mom needed to be comforted. And I said, "Mom, it's okay. Everything is fine. You are so strong, and I'm so proud of you for how hard you're fighting." And I really was from the depths of my soul, from hearing how hard she was just fighting to breathe when she would roll over, her stats would take a nosedive. The fact that she had had the mental fortitude to, fight this, I was so proud of her. And I'm operating in this phone call very well knowing that this would be the last time I would ever speak to my mom, and I knew it was going to be important, and so I told her everything. I put it all out on the line, and I always kind of think what other people in Teach Mex must have thought, and I said, "The kids are always gonna know you. I'm so proud of you. I love you. Everything you would want." And she said everything back, and it was just this, like, such a beautiful moment, and I had told her that her brother from Chicago, or who was out of town, had come down to Chicago to support the family, and she got really emotional, and I could tell it was getting hard for her to breathe. And so I can remember kinda, like, moving my cart closer to the checkout, and I said, "Mom, I love you so much. I hope you dream of something so good, and we're gonna talk real soon." And through tears, she told me she loved me, and we hung up the phone, and that was the last time I would ever speak to my mom. And it's heartbreaking for sure. If I would have been doing this interview or telling you my story, maybe even just less than a year ago, I would have been crying telling you this. And it's not that it doesn't hurt my heart, but I'm at a different place because I am operating out of such gratitude. I am so thankful for that last conversation. I feel privileged and honored because so many people don't get to have it. And it's my perspective. And I think the stage of grief that I'm in has really allowed me to understand, don't be sad about that. It was a gift. It was such a gift. And that's a weird, thing to kind of reconcile into your brain, but truly, I understand the gravity of all of that. So, at this point, I would say in the next 2 days after that phone call, we really started hearing conversations of her going onto the ventilator. Her lungs were not getting any better, and now what happens is she's breathing so many breaths per minute. Somebody like my age, my weight can do it for 4 or 5 days, but you have to think she was so tired, she was 63, she was overweight, um, she would tire out soon, and they didn't wanna get it to an emergent situation where it's going into a nosedive, they can't help it, they wanna do it in a controlled setting. So she puts it off, and she puts it off, and she puts it off, and she continues to fight, and finally, one of the doctors comes in and really levels with her, and she agrees to go on to the ventilator. And there's a lot of things that I don't think, we realized when she went onto that ventilator, like, she would be so, so heavily sedated, and it varies from patient to patient. Some people can be on a ventilator completely conscious. Other people panic or their brain overrides what the ventilator settings are saying and have to be sedated on, like, fentanyl, Versed, all these different huge drugs. And so, um she's completely sedated. And at first, we were in the school of thought of maybe this ventilator will allow her body to heal. She'll get the break that she needs. And she had agreed to go on to it. It was from our understanding with the doctor that she had agreed to go on it, but not for a long term. She wanted to give it a try. And she had mentioned that I think I'm going to give the ventilator a try in our last conversations. I said, okay, I think that's a good idea. And then, she would do it. And so a time clock starts with that ventilator. And they do not like to keep patients on a ventilator during, like, let's say, the stage of COVID protocol for more than 3 weeks, because then you get into risk of infection, vocal cord long term, damage, and everything like that. And so she stayed on that ventilator, I would say close to 3 weeks, and then they started to put on the pressure on us. And there was no clinical signs of improvement. And so we had this one doctor, we nicknamed him Dr. Death. It wasn't to be mean, but he would just straight up tell you she's not going to make it. She's not going to have a meaningful recovery. She no chance of a meaningful recovery. She will not be accepted into a long-term care facility. She will not be able to stay here. We will not be able to get her awake. She'll be on a permanent feeding tube. And this was the same message we had heard over and over and over. And so he said she's really getting worse. And he just flat out said she's not going to make it. So I'm in the middle of, holiday season for my business at the time, but of course I go and I get on a plane. It's our times to say goodbye. And so I fly to Chicago, and I can play it out like it's a movie. And I am walking into the hospital, ironically, that I was born in, that my mother would die in. And I can tell you the feel of the Chicago cold air rushing in as you go in through the doors. And I can tell you what the woman looks like at the reception desk. You register, you get a name badge, you go down this long hallway, you go up this elevator, and you enter the ICU. And then you do the COVID protocol, which is everything has to happen in a certain order. You put on the gown, and then one glove goes on, but somebody has to put it on for you. Then another glove, because your hands, can't contaminate all the stuff. You have to wear goggles, mask, all this stuff. And I can remember getting close to her room and our footsteps slowing down. And I knew I was going to see her. And I tell you this next part because PTSD and medical trauma and the way in which you see your loved ones suffer, if that's part of your story, is part of your story. And it's okay to talk about, because then you realize you aren't alone. And I'll tell you a lot more about not being alone in a minute. But I see my mom. She's prone, so she's laying on her stomach. Her, like, bare legs are sticking out of the blanket. Her extremities are so swollen, and her hair is matted. I mean, she's going on 3 weeks, of not having 2 weeks maybe. I don't even know how long of not having a shower, and her hair is pulled up in a rubber band like you'd find in an office holding papers together, and I would come around the side of her. I would see some, like, dried blood all over her arms. I'm sure, she had been poked so many times. There's so many machines, so many wires, more than you could ever even imagine the level of care when you're in the ICU. And so I kind of turn and I see, her face is turned to the side and she's got this huge tube sticking out of her mouth, and then like a pool of like saliva and just bile is collecting at her eye. And I just let out this like audible, like, oh, mom, like, oh, mom. And that image stuck with me for a long time. And then I was speaking to this woman who lost her daughter to COVID. She had the same exact pictures in her mind that I did. And she said, I will not let the way I saw my daughter in her final moments be the way I remember her. And that helped me so much. It's like, I'll be damned if I'm going to let that image of my mom occupy space as the vehicle of how I remember her. And I do think that there was trauma tied to it, and it didn't happen overnight, but having that rationale of like, that's not the memory you keep. It will not serve you. It's not an accurate representation of the way to remember somebody. So I just encourage any of you, if you've seen some hard things, just remember that it's not the way you should remember your loved one. And it seems so easy when I just say it like that. And it took work, but I can recall it, but I'm not thinking about it. I don't have the nightmares like I used to, and it's just kind of become part of the story where I'm able to keep the train moving. And so we're in there and I start trying to clean her up. And it was almost out of panic. And I go and I'm like trying to wipe off her face and at least get it out of her eye. And I go and get a wet, washcloth, and I'm trying to get the blood off of her. And I just realized, like, hey, what am I doing? So that was a hard moment. And so I said everything that I needed to say to her again. And then we sang her "You Are My Sunshine." It was one of the toughest, most unplanned moments that will define my life. You're singing, "Don't Take My Sunshine Away." Um, that was tough. And so I call my husband and I say, like, Brian, it's really bad. If you don't want to see it, I absolutely understand. Like, I get it. It's okay. And he was like, no. And so I turned the FaceTime around and he says the exact same thing. Oh, mom. And in that moment, he speaks to her some of the most beautiful words that have brought me such a solidness to my marriage, to realize that it's about the life's bigger moments and that we can kind of get through anything. And he told her that he says, I don't want you to worry about Megan. I'll take care of her for the rest of my life. I will take care of your grandkids. You do not have to worry if you need to go be with God. We understand. He would tell her again, just like I would, the kids will always know you. We will keep your memory alive. He talked about how proud he was of her. And he thanked her for everything that she had ever done. And I hung up the phone and we had met with the doctor outside, Dr. Death. And I had this resounding feeling that the state that I saw her in is not something that she would have wanted, and that this had to end. This was no way to live. And we had given it a fair shot and it hadn't worked. And so we all kind of came to an understanding, especially after the doctor continued to tell us the messaging that she wasn't going to get better. And so we were going to pull her off the ventilator. But in our last conversation, she had mentioned that she said, "I think I'll get married if I get out of here." And I said, "Okay, whatever you want, I'll support you, whatever you want." And so we had a commitment ceremony. She's fully unconscious. The hospital broke every single protocol that you could ever imagine. And flowers were brought. She had so many flowers. They exchanged rings. We all said some beautiful things. It was recorded. And it was looked at as this like light for the care staff. I remember one of the administrators from the hospital just thanking me over and over again that they could give this to their staff. I think these people were so beaten down that this is something that they needed. And we were going to wait on her brother to get there. And then we were going to move forward with the end of care. And in that time period before he got there, some of my family members started feeling like it was too soon and that she maybe had more fight to give or something more could be done. And so they didn't. They decided not to end care. And I was not her medical power of attorney. I had no say in the decision. I knew in my heart what the decision should have been for me personally, but there was nothing that I could do. And so we sat down in a family waiting room, and one of the doctors, this was a new foreign doctor, he was very kind, and he said, "I believe in God." And he said, "I will not assign her a 0% chance of life, but I will not give her more than 1% of a meaningful recovery." And it was all the same things again, and urging everybody to look at the larger trends of her care and everything like that. And so I remember looking at my family and I said, "I love you all. I respect you, but I cannot sit around and watch this happen." And I got up and I left. And so I very much knew that I was not going to be able to sway opinion, that I could not watch her suffer like this. And so I made the choice to go back to Chicago. And that was probably the hardest thing I've ever done, but I knew it was the right thing, and thank God I did, because that next few days after I got back, my entire family came down with hand, foot, and mouth, and it was bad. Super high fevers. I've never seen my husband so sick. It was not fun. And so I went back the next day, and the kindness that the hospital had extended and allowing them to literally break every protocol had been ended. And I understood why. And I remember apologizing to her nurses, to her doctors, just profusely apologizing. I was so sorry that we had put them through this and that they could have seen a dignified death and that they didn't get it. And they had advocated for her as hard as they could, just as hard as I had. And so I asked if I could come get her belongings, and I went up there, and they handed it to me through a cracked door, her cracked door. It was a purse and some books. And I walked out carrying my mom's belongings, and I just looked at her, and I think I had said to myself, like, "This is it. This is it." And you're at such a loss, and you just walk out. And got on a plane, came home to Aiken. She would have continued to fight. We were steps away from putting her on a tracheotomy, which is not something I believe she would have wanted long term. She woke up with a infection, swollen, all kinds of terrible things, swollen lips, was further going down the trend. And I think that it was really tough in our situation because you're almost waiting for other organs to failure or you fail, or the other shoe to drop, but hers never did. And something that I understood was, you only need one single organ failure to not sustain life. And she wasn't going to be a candidate for a lung transplant. She wasn't a candidate for ECMO, which we had been hearing had some success. Without your lungs, you cannot sustain life. And that was the one thing that wasn't working, and everything else was holding out strong. And so we would have had a physician, consulted another physician that wasn't caring for her, that had been giving us updates the entire time. And he had talked to Dr. Death on this particular rotation that was really advocating for my mom. He was the one that had the conversation with her, knew that she didn't want extended, prolonged life, you know, life-saving measures, and gave him a complete scope of her state of care. And so for the first time, this doctor understood, how much steroids they had given, um, her weight having such a factor in her battle of COVID, everything. He got a complete picture. And so he called and said, "I'm sorry if I would have known all this, you should have done this when your sister was in town, when I was in town in Chicago. Don't, it's time. And I promised I would tell you when it was time, and it's time." And so, I was given the chance to fly to Chicago, but I couldn't wait another minute. Every minute passing was like torture. And so, my family didn't realize, and I'm glad they didn't realize, because I didn't want the course of history to change itself. But that night on our wedding anniversary, we would have gotten a call, and for the first time in 30 days, my mom's eyes would have been wide open. And the care staff had warned us that there could be like gasping, but they would give drugs for that, and it'd be peaceful, and they dimmed the lights and had some peaceful music on. And my mom fought for exactly just about an hour. She fought really hard. Her eyes never moved, but had tears. And she just was looking straight forward. And anytime we would talk to her, I kept reassuring her. I said, like, "Mom, it's okay. You go be with God. Like, we love you." Her heart rate would go up, and then it would come down, and then it would go up when I would talk again. So I knew it was prolonging things. And I knew that I couldn't talk anymore. And we just watched her heart rate fall from the 90s to 0. And we closed her eyes, and she was gone. And it's surreal enough to lose a parent. It's a whole nother level to watch it happen on the phone. But again, it's that shift in mindset. A lot of people did not get that. And not even people who've lost somebody to COVID, but somebody who, lost somebody in a car accident or to a drug overdose or whatever it might be. It was a privilege to have got to see with my own eyes her last moments and to give her some reassuring words. So, again, it took a long time to arrive at that, but there it is. And so, these moments, they're so defining. They're so part of your story and your journey. And so I just kept the train moving really for the kids. We were coming up to Thanksgiving. I have 2 children. We were coming up to Christmas, and I can just remember just kind of going through the motions. And one of the craziest experiences was I knew, she had died early in the morning hours, and I had told my husband, I was like, "If I'll go in, I'll tell our oldest daughter, and if she's okay, we'll send her to school. And of course, if she's not okay, we will keep her home." And so I go, and I've woken her up a million times. She never really moves too much. She might roll over, look at you, or ask what time it is. But on this day, I woke her up and I said, "Faye," and she was on like the edge of her bed, standing up, grabbing, hugging me at my neck as tight as she could, saying, "I'm sorry." And it scared me. It scared me so bad. And so I kind of like pushed her off of me. I mean, it scared me for sure. Like, what do you mean you're sorry? And I pushed her off, and I just said, like, "Faye." And she like kind of jolted like a little bit, like, "Oh." And I said, "Honey, like, you remember how grandma's been sick?" I said, like, "She went to be with God." And when I tell you my kid was inconsolable, that's like an understatement. And so her main thing was who was gonna take care of her boyfriend. She was worried about that. And then she was really sad that she didn't get to say goodbye. So, I called in my husband and I said, like, "Grandma is an angel now. She's everywhere." And I brought her into my lap and I just said, like, "You can tell her whatever you need to tell her right now. She is listening." And that was heartbreaking. And so I just knew I needed a minute. And so I get her to a place where she's okay. We keep her in her room. And I go and get coffee for a quick second. I need a fresh air. This was a lot. And so my son wakes up in that time that I'm gone. My husband doesn't say a word. He puts Hudson into the playroom, and he's separate from his sister. My husband hasn't said anything, and I walk in and I said, Hudson, I said, you know how grandma was sick? And he just so matter of factly says, yes, she's went to be with God. And I said, like, what? And he says, grandma's with God. And I'm like, and I like look at my husband who's standing in the doorway, and I was like, did you say something? And he's like, not a single word. And I just think in some universe, I believe in God, my kids knew. I don't know if she came to tell them. I don't know. They just knew. I didn't have to tell my son that she was gone. It was just so profound, so crazy. So we've had lots and lots and lots of little moments like that. And so I guess that kind of like wraps up how I lost her. I would say in the most like in those few moments right after her death, I never really had like a full on breakdown. I just kept moving, but it was very much like that fog that a lot of you who have experienced grief could relate to. You don't really know what you're doing. Sometimes you go drive down the road and you'll be like, oh, God, you're just on autopilot. And so I started writing, and I started going over like her medical records and just everything like that. And I needed to understand how this all happened so quickly. And I felt like I needed to write. And so I wrote a book. I started writing a book about every chapter is one of the last 30 days of her life. Each chapter is one day. And so it was so healing. And I had this like aha moment when I'm writing the book. And I have this reflection that I was, I think, 36 at the time, and how hard this was for me. And then you find out how many people died of COVID that were the primary caregivers of their families. And so you understand that in different socioeconomic statuses, a lot of households in the United States are mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, sometimes an aunt, and all the kids living in one house. And so when COVID came knocking on these people's door, they wiped out multi generations of families. And so I wanted to start a 501c3, and it was called COVID is a Thief. And so I was so passionate, so excited. I wanted to raise money for children who have lost their primary caregiver to COVID. And I'm doing research and I'm trying to understand the legislation and how we're helping these kids. So I go and I have a background in internet marketing and social media, and I'm trying to promote it. And I see that in Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, I think I even tried Snapchat, there is a absolute censor being placed on the word COVID. And I don't even know if many of you will be able to find this episode. It's a risk. It's a risk for me to even put this episode up to associate it with this podcast, because it's totally possible that it could get blacklisted. So I was ready, right? And I was so excited. And because this 501c3 had the word COVID in it, because any posts that I would make had the word COVID in it, and I made sure to do my homework too. So I had given a podcast interview to a wonderful woman. Her podcast is named For Those We've Lost, and she interviews exclusively people who've lost their loved one to COVID. She said the black hole is very real. She couldn't get any traction on her podcast. It was like it didn't even exist. She would try different spelling. She would not use the word. She would even go as far as to put like C star star space O, star star star. It just ridiculous. And if you go into your search bar of Facebook and you put it, it warns you about misinformation still. And the only way I could equate this or draw a parallel is like if somebody died on 9/11 and all this time has passed and the big social media networks are still censoring it, those people can't even tell their stories. And that's just That's a shitty place to be. There's no other way to say it. And so it's gone into a black hole. I lose steam. I start finishing up my book. And I'm like, well, this sucks. I was really excited. There's nothing that I can do. And I would say, struggling at this point. I have a lot of why questions. I'm profoundly sad. We're going through her estate, which was a bit of a mess. That's just, you have to have your affairs in order, top to bottom, all the way around. And so my dad's like, I think it's time. I can like go get some help. And I don't think he was wrong. I was doing fine, but it's not how I wanted to like continue my days. And I had had this very real memory of when my mom lost her mom. It was so debilitating to her and so profound. And she never really went to do anything about it. And I knew I was going to need to put in the work. I knew that this was traumatic. I knew that I would have to go do some work. And so I saw that it was a Facebook post. There was a local church here that my daughter had actually been going to youth group for some time. So I saw it and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go. And it's called Grief Share. It's a nationwide program that meets weekly. I want to say 13 or 12, 13 or 14. It's some weeks duration. You go once a week and you listen to video, you talk with other people who have gone through something similar. And it was the single most transforming experience post grief that I've ever had. And the ways in which it's touched my life are indescribable. The healing it's brought to my heart, the perspective and connection has brought me back to my faith. I really believe that I lost my mom, and the direct result of that ripple effect is that I have a renewed sense of faith. And it is probably one of the best gifts my mom could have ever given me, ever. And you will find that there are people that share similar stories. And then I came to a realization that grief knows no socioeconomic status, it knows no race, no age, it has no bounds. And so many people go through the same thing and nobody's talking about it. And not only that, but it is also the event that all of us are going to face. And so I remember shortly after losing my mom, I'm sitting at a restaurant for a birthday celebration, and I'm looking at everybody, and it was like, oh my God, all these people are going to go through and carry the pain that I have gone through. Maybe it won't be their parents. Maybe it would be a sibling or an aunt or their parents or a child, God forbid, a child. And I just thought, oh my God, like everyone will know what this feels like. And that stuck around with me for a while. And so, so I'm in this group, and it's some of the most profound stories that I've ever heard. And I am friends with people that I never thought I would be friends with. I would have never crossed paths. We've all helped each other so much. I'm really blessed to be in a group where there's a large membership, and we have become like a family. And I'm on my second session now because they changed all the material, they updated it. And every time you go through, so many people have gone through it like year after year, because grief has no timetable. And what I got out of the first session is something so different of what I'm getting out of the second session. And maybe now I'm there more to work through my own things, but to help somebody else. And it's just such a great experience. I really, really recommend it for anybody who may be looking for a path of healing. If maybe therapy isn't your thing, that's, try out Grief Share. It's incredible. So I'm sitting there, and I leave every time, and I come home and tell my husband some of the stories from that session. And I just have this resounding like moment of like, these people have stories to tell. And not only do those people have stories to tell, but we all agree talking about it has helped us all so, so much. And so I'm like, I have to tell these people stories. I have the background. I know how to put on podcasts. I'm learning how to edit and improve video quality. and sound quality and all those things. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to tell these people's stories. So in the first episode, it was Marilyn Diamond who lost her son to opioid abuse. And we met in the grief share group, and her story is incredible. And yeah, just her willing to be so vulnerable opened up my heart so much, and I can connect so much with her story, but it's not even the same story, but grief has this universal component to it that's just undeniable. So then in our second episode, I interviewed Josh Bolin, and this was the game changer for me because we have men in our group, but so oftentimes men are just taught to not talk about their feelings. He lost his father to suicide, and there's some shame around that too, in the stigma, in the BS of the world. There's some stigma, even though that's the number 2 leading cause of death in men, which needs to be talked about. So obviously, you can tell I'm heated and I'm passionate about this. And he was so brave and so open and honest. And we've talked so much through text after this about how we want to do a second session. And his story was shared so many times, and so was Marilyn's. And I'm just like, people need this. And so this is what I will do with my free time. I will try to bring you a new story every single week. I think it was important this week to tell you my own story just so you can understand, have a reference point to where I'm coming. And I guess I have to ask myself the question of 3 words that would describe my current state of grief. And it would be acceptance. I now place my heart, my burdens, I put them down for God, and I don't have to pick them back up, right? So many times, like we'll say in our prayers, and then we go and we pick back up that same burden. And definitely guilty, like, and that's human nature. But I would say acceptance. I would say that, and did not write these down before or think about it that much. I would say that I have a gratefulness. I am grateful that I got these moments that so many people just don't get to have. I am grateful that my mom knew how much she meant to me. I knew how much I meant to her. And I am so grateful for that. I'm so grateful that her last visit was incredible, that I got a last really good hug out in my driveway. I'm so eternally grateful for those gifts. So acceptance, grateful. I think this is 2 of the words that Josh used in his last episode. Um, and this is a phrase, but a renewed sense of faith. I just have connected with scripture and God in ways that I never have before. I grew up going to church, kind of like lost my way in college. Brian and I moved around so much. We had been trying so many different churches. We hadn't found one. And then, we found our church that we've been attending, Millbrook, and it's incredible. And there's such a support system for families and activities. And just really the teaching of the scripture has been like just really powerful. And then obviously Grief Share has just been incredible. Can't say enough good things about it. So I guess those are my 2 words in one phrase of my current state of grief. And the last thing that I want to touch on is it has taken me a minute to get to this point. And give yourself grace if you are not at this state or mindset that I'm in. Because at first it was messy. There would be times I was angry at God. There was times I was angry at my mom. There was questioning. There was extreme just sadness. I mean, at one point I was even mad that I had her ashes on my bookshelf, like that I had been placed in this situation where I have my dead mom's ashes in her house. And that's just grief. And it's not like there's going to be no end date. There is the you who you were before this event and the you that you were after. And at some point, and I think I'm still working to do this, you have to reconcile that it's okay. This new normal, this new you is fine. It's going to change your belief systems. It's going to change your friends. It's going to change everything. It can't not change who you are. And it's okay. It's part of your story. And I used to tell myself this when I was pregnant. And I say this to my friends who are pregnant, just surrender. The sooner you surrender, the better off you'll be. And it's like, just surrender to this thing called grief, go through the emotions, do the work, just surrender. No harm will come from doing it, and also realize that part of my journey was not getting on medication or things like that, but it is totally normal if you need some additional support. It's absolutely normal. And it's okay to go and seek that help. There are so many resources, and there should be no shame. But more importantly, too, or equally as important, is let's all just start having a conversation. And that's the goal of interviews of grief. That is what I will try to do. And I just thank you guys all so much for your time. It means the world to me. And I hope that you just come on this journey with me. Thank you so much.